Welcome back to BadgerBlitz TV, your Rivals.com destination for all things Wisconsin athletics. I'm Matt Perkins, joined as always by BadgerBlitz.com publisher and editor-in-chief John McNamara. Great to see you again, as always, buddy.
Great to see you too, Matt. Best time of the week.
Yes, it is, John. And we had a little technical difficulties here at the top, but we're still rolling along here on BadgerBlitz TV like we always do. Biggest news this week so far has been the commitment of linebacker Aden Reeder out of Cincinnati. John, he's going to play off ball for the Badgers, even though he's listed on Rivals as an edge. How does he fit into Mike Trestle's defense, and sort of what does this commitment mean for the rest of the 26 class?
Yeah, I like the get quite a bit, actually. You go back to St. Xavier. It's a powerhouse program in the state of Ohio. And
Case Wolf's alma mater.
Yeah, to go back in the used to Ben file, like I remember Chase Wolf, they weren't going to let Wisconsin come in and recruit there anymore. And that was a kind of a storyline, St. Xavier's going to shut their doors to Wisconsin. Those storylines are they grab people's attention for a couple of weeks and they fade away. So Wisconsin is now welcome back, has been welcome back. And that's a good get. I think my biggest takeaway is, Rivals has him listed as an edge. And when you have a guy like 6'3", 215, I think first glance, that's kind of an edge guy. But you look at what the way that Wisconsin's defense is trending, a guy like Christian Allegro, who starts on the edge, they move him inside. He's 6'4". Mason Post, he's coming in. I think we had him as an outside linebacker right away. He's going to play inside. He's 6'3". Landon Gauthier, same profile. And then they move a guy like Thomas Heiberger, 6'4", from the edge, move him inside. So I think they want to add a little bit more length to that. Let's just call it linebacker now, or like you talked, Matt, off the ball linebacker, and not really that inside Midwest Mike, I think, as Clint likes to describe him anymore. That position looks like it's adding some length, and Reeder certainly brings that. 6'3", 215 right now. Probably a guy that could play 235, 240 after a couple years at Wisconsin. Rangy, long, pretty athletic. I like, a lot of his tape is, what he does coming off the edge. I'm curious to see what he's able to do at that inside spot, at that inside linebacker spot. So I like to get a very traditional Midwest recruiting battle. Wisconsin was there, Minnesota, Iowa. I think it helps to beat programs like that, your quote unquote rivals. And then, like I said, to get into St. X again, I think is good. He talked about him being familiar with, Luke Fickell and some of the guys there and the connections in Ohio. So I think, it's a good start at that inside linebacker spot for Wisconsin.
I think the one thing about him that I am going to be watching is how his tackling changes from being an edge to being off ball, right? Because he's going to be, as an edge, he's not going to be taking having as many guys in the open field that he's going to have to tackle, right? And so I feel like, you look at his tape and he's a pretty solid tackler, but I think it is a different kind of tackling you're doing as an off-ball linebacker as opposed to an edge who's crashing down.
Yeah, I was looking for that on tape of, how would that translate? And there are some where takes on that impact of a lineman, sheds him, makes the tackle. I think that's what he'll see more often or most often. But, with what Wisconsin wants to do, I think that you want to let those linebackers run free. I think every defense wants that, but with Wisconsin getting bigger up front, I think they like a guy like Christian Alego, Tackett Curtis. I mean, those could be big time tackle production guys. I don't think you want to have safeties like Hunter Wool or lead you in tackles anymore. I think you want to have those linebackers be able to roam free and really clean up stuff in front of them. And I think Reeder's a guy that will be able to do that, even though he, most of his tape is on the edge, but he's going to obviously flip to the inside for Wisconsin.
Well, let's talk about the rest of that position here for 2026, because it looks like Wisconsin is probably going to take two there at that linebacker, off ball, whatever we want to call it, position now. And so that's going to lead us into talking about the defensive officials coming up over the next couple of weeks, starting with the weekend of May 19th. And they have another linebacker visiting that weekend. That's in-state Ben Wenzel from Appleton. John, do you think that Wisconsin ends up with the pair of Reeder and Wenzel coming out of this class, or is there, still a chance for someone like a Mason Martin who's coming hopefully later in June for his official.
Yeah, that seems like the most realistic combination to me. Like you talked about, Matt, not a huge position of need. It's tough to look too far down the road, but right now that entire room could potentially return, with the exception of Garrison Soliday, who's a fifth-year walk-on. You could bring back Curtis and Allegro as your starting guys. Heiberger gets healthy. You're high on, obviously Mason Posa. Cooper Catalano, I think, opened some eyeballs this spring, and he was constantly, you read Donnie Slusher's stuff, you read Cam's stuff that we had from the site. They mention him on a consistent basis. So I think you feel good about that position. Now, how it translates to recruiting, I don't think they need more than two there. You saw that after Reeder committed that night, TJ White announced that he was not going to take his official. I don't think that's coincidence. I think that was communicated to him. I don't know that was one Wisconsin was favored in or was going to win in the end, but those things are connected. You talked about Ben Wenzel, not a new kid on Wisconsin's radar, but his importance to this class has obviously been, elevated quite a bit, because he will take that official visit on that, May 29th, May 30th weekend, that first big weekend. And if Wisconsin's bringing you up on that weekend, it means that they want to add you to this class. Doesn't have an offer yet, but I can't imagine that they're going to bring him up and not offer. I would imagine they're going to put that full court press on him. You're an in-state kid. We want to keep our in-state kids here. You guys are, all the conversation that goes into that. We had a chance to talk to him after he visited in the spring, and he talked about Wisconsin being, the school he grew up watching and all those type of things. But his recruitment has changed. Wisconsin is now a very big option for him, but Oklahoma is there as well. That was the eye-opener offer. Oklahoma doesn't come into Wisconsin and offer kids very often. And Kansas is there as well. So I think he's looking hard at those three. I would imagine Wisconsin doesn't want him to go to Oklahoma. And I think that if everything kind of goes the way I anticipate, Ben Wenzel could be part of this class, before June 1st hits. I think that's how quickly it could happen. And then you have Wenzel, Reeder as your inside linebackers in this class.
Well, let's take a look at the rest of the defensive side of the ball in terms of official visitors coming up later this month and next month. We'll start on the interior defensive line. That first weekend, they've got Yaya God from my home state of Tennessee, coming up to visit. They've also got Jameer Perez the following weekend from Cleveland, who's a longtime target. Jermaine Polk, who I think could play edge or on the defensive line out of Toledo, is also coming that same weekend there in June. So those are the I think three guys to really keep an eye on here. John, obviously, I think defensive line is always going to be a position of need, no matter the class, because of how important that position is, not just to this defense, but to college football in 2025. And, we've talked many, many times about the reasons that defensive linemen after quarterbacks get the biggest NIL deals. It's because they are some of the most important ones. So, John, how is this defensive line class shaking out for 2026 and these visitors?
Yeah, I think they're still, adjusting that board. I think Jake Johnson, even though that was a bit, about a month ago or so when he committed, that was a top target for them. So I think they're making some adjustments. Jameer Perez, as you mentioned, he picked up an offer from Ohio State, an in-state Buckeyes there. I don't know exactly where he stacks up on their recruiting boards. But obviously I think if they kind of put the pedal to the metal there, they could probably lock him up again. Ohio State and some of those programs have the luxury of, yes, you have an offer, but you will work on our timeline when we want you to, in terms of how you want to operate with this offer here. So I think really it starts with King Liggins and where he ends up. He's the kid who has taken his official visit to Wisconsin already. He took that in April. We talked about him, probably a number of times on this show, Matt. A longtime target. They offered last summer during camp. He would be a big domino to fall in Wisconsin's favor. I think it's Wisconsin, Iowa right now. You get him, I think the outlook changes a little bit. You probably need maybe two more. Some of the guys you mentioned, I think Wisconsin's in on. Certainly they're getting those guys up for official visits. But another guy to look at is Arthur Scott, projected interior guy from Ohio. Just picked up an offer from Wisconsin, was in Madison for the spring showcase will return for that first weekend. So I think that kind of shows where his importance is, where he kind of stacks up on Wisconsin's recruiting board. So, right now that's a very winnable offer list. I mean, you have West Virginia, you have Rutgers, you have Cincinnati. That feels like one that you can come out on top for if Wisconsin really pushes hard for him. And I think they will, right? I think that, they want to get bigger up front. They want to put an emphasis on defensive line. So I think a guy like Scott coming up, I think they're going to ride the momentum with him and try to close him out for that first week. And again, I can't stress how important it is for the guys that they're bringing up that May 30th. Those are all absolute top priority guys for the staff. So I would imagine that, they're going to really put the screws to Scott and see if they can add him to this class.
Speaking of that first weekend and important recruits, I'd argue that Jackson Samuels Ford is probably the most important edge they've been after, next to Carmelo Reed, who's already committed. This class, he'll be there that first weekend alongside Ashton Blatt out of Pittsburgh. And so obviously those are two real big time guys. I think Samuels Ford is someone that this coaching staff, Matt Mitchell in particular, has been after forever. And you could argue at this point that with quarterback off the board, he might be the most important guy. He might be atop their board out of all players, period.
You could certainly make a case for that. And, he had a real, I think, eye-opening visit when he was on campus, for that junior day. I think Wisconsin was there and Matt Mitchell put in that effort there, but he comes off that visit and all of a sudden Wisconsin's vaulted up to one of his top schools. I certainly think that, Penn State's going to be there if they want to push hard for him, a handful of others, but he is a big time target for them. And someone that, again, they're going to push hard for on that first weekend. You mentioned Blatt, this will be his second visit weekend. His second time visiting Wisconsin. Obviously, he's a big time target for them. And then, to Carmelo Reed is the piece that they have there right now, that big jumbo edge, very much in the mold of the guys that they have right now. Corey Walker, Michael Gardner, two guys, in that 290, 300-pound range. I think that's what they envision Carmelo Reed being. Now you need a guy that can get to the quarterback. And I think Samuels Ford is that potentially. Blatt is that potentially for you. And then they got some guys lined up in, the middle of June that could potentially work for them as well. So I think, 3 is a likely number there, but we'll have to see, how things go with that first weekend. And then do they need those additional weekends beyond that?
Yeah. So we're looking at Reed and 2 more in an ideal class.
Yeah, and then, Mikhail Blade is kind of the wild card there. I put Prince Williams there as well. He visited for the showcase. Doesn't have any officials lined up to my knowledge, but Mikhail Blade is one of the top edge prospects in the country, and he's popped up on campus a handful of times. Obviously, a kid from Illinois, that's an easy trip for him, but he is a top priority for Notre Dame, lots of schools in the SEC, but Wisconsin's battling right now. It would not surprise me if he popped on campus for an official visit. And if you had 4 linebackers committed, outside guys committed, he wanted to add Blade, they would find – he's a find room type of kid for Wisconsin this class.
He's absolutely one of those players. We've talked off-ball linebackers. Let's move back to the safeties. I think they've got 2 obviously very high priority guys on campus that first weekend in Zachary Taylor and Nick Reddish out of Katy, Texas and Charlotte respectively. But I think something that I'm keeping an eye on is a pair of teammates out of Marietta, Georgia that are coming in mid-June, and Howell Kambe and Tony Forney. They're going after more Georgia prospects. Like they are, trying to head down into the South, but especially it seems like in Tennessee and Georgia, they've been offering more guys, bringing more guys up to campus. I just think that's a trend to keep an eye on. I don't think necessarily either of these guys are going to be Badgers in the end, but I do think it is important to establish these relationships with the coaching staff. So some of these bigger programs, right? Like we'll talk about here in a little bit about Theodore, the cornerback out of Chattanooga, who's at Baylor, which is a phenomenal program here in Tennessee. And sort of getting these inroads, I think, says something about the direction of the recruiting staff.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned going into Georgia. I remember, the memory lane was when Wisconsin got into Georgia and got Krenwick Sanders, Jeremy Patterson, and those were going to be the big inroads that they made there. 2 big time guys at the time. But the states that mentioned for recruits, right? Texas, Florida, but Georgia's absolutely loaded as well. And you mentioned, Forney and Combe, two teammates there, two defensive backs, up for the spring showcase, and really a credit to Jack Cooper and what he's been able to do in their recruitments to get them back for official visits. Forney is super versatile. I had a chance to talk with him. He could play safety, he could play nickel, he could play corner, he could do just about anything for it. I think that's the value that he adds. And then, Combe is certainly one of the top safeties in the country. His recruitment's a little bit on a tier above at Forney's just in terms of the schools involved. But to get them at the same time, it's that June 13th weekend. So I think that weekend is very much in flux of, we might have to cancel, we might have to add, but to have them there, if they can get there, right? Things can happen quickly in June, but that's big for Wisconsin. I think, those are certainly guys that they would take regardless of who they have lined up. And, right now, I don't think there's a safety I can point to that right now that said, I think Wisconsin's in a great place for him where they're going to lock him down. I think there's a lot that they feel good about, but no one is a surefire guy that you feel like, yes, they will certainly commit after that official visit. So there's a lot of movement there. And, the more talent that you can get to Madison in June, the better your results are obviously going to be.
Well, let's finish off then with the corners. Carson Elam's is obviously already committed and is a big piece for this staff and someone I personally am very high on. I think he could be a real contributor. I think he's a very twitchy kid who could be someone who comes in and plays pretty early. But, cornerbacks out in nickelback is going to be a big position of need for this defense, regardless, just because they're pretty much always have 5 defensive backs on the field. So besides Elam's, though, I mentioned Theodore from Chattanooga, who's coming that second weekend. But it's a little light here on corners, John, which surprises me.
Yeah, that's maybe the biggest position of not necessarily need, but biggest position of question in my mind, because like you mentioned, they have right now 2 guys who plan to take officials and 1 is committed. That cornerback group is thin right now. Obviously, you got your 2 top guys in Ricardo Hallman, Nazir Forkerine. Deani Hill's entering his last year, so you'll for sure have 3 transitioning out of the program. I think you need to bring in 3 more, but that's proven to be a tough spot because sure, you can recruit these guys, but if they don't play in a year, they seem to bolt out. Now, I don't think that's a Wisconsin thing. I think that's a college football thing. I don't know if it's a specific cornerback thing, but that's a tough thing for that staff to say, hey, we feel like we've recruited really well here, but like if we can't get them on the field immediately, they transfer out. But then we have guys like Hallman and Forkerine, who are these veteran guys that we have to play. So I don't know how you go about that. I think you just got to continue to pound recruiting, add guys. If they leave, that's college football. But they have to get more than 2 cornerbacks up in June. I think they will. I think more names will come out. You saw a guy like Kamari Bing, a Maryland recruit, who just posted an offer from Wisconsin, and I think he took it down. But from what I'm told, that's a legit offer. So maybe they're trying to keep that a little quiet. We're talking about it, so I don't know how quiet it's going to be. Only about 1,000 people watch a week, so maybe it won't get out too far. Probably won't get out to Maryland. So I think they're continuing to evaluate that position. Offer new guys, get guys up in June. That to me is the position in most flux in terms of guys that they're trying to get up. So it's 2 right now, but it could be 4 by the time we hit the end record button, Matt. Guys are out on the road. Things can change. Things will change. It just kind of a matter of who those names will be moving forward.
I think it's especially important when John, you talk about how you got to keep pounding recruiting. Well, they lost 6 cornerbacks from the 2023 class. They're all gone. So they don't have the backfill. They don't have these guys that they've recruited who are ready to step in and play. You throw in the Xavier Lucas situation. They are thin, and that is a little bit concerning. There probably will be, maybe 3 or 4 officials that take place this fall, probably a couple corners in there. I think it has to be at this point. If you're, even if it is just 4 guys officially visiting in the spring and 1's committed, if you're going to land 3, you're probably not going to land. You're not going to land those 3 other, 2 of those 3 other guys who are visiting. It's in a numbers game. It's just not going to happen, especially at this point if you haven't built up those long time relationships. Here as we come into commit season. So I think that's probably actually the position on defense that I might be most concerned with at the moment. Even with the commitment of Elam's.
I wouldn't argue with that. Like I said, I think you got to get 3. I think you just got to keep pounding, recruiting. Hopefully you can build these guys up, develop them. But yeah, I don't know. You just can't keep going to the portal. You don't want to do it. I don't think at any position, but some of these guys are real hit or miss. I think they got a good one in Latimer. He sounds like he's going to be a nice nickel option, but I don't think you're going to get, kind of scheme changing corners through the transfer portal unless you got a big sack of money to deliver at their doorstep.
Yeah. And the guys who are that good in the portal are going to end up at Alabama and LSU and Ohio State and USC and Oregon and the places like you mentioned, John, that have the big bucks. And as it stands right now, UW doesn't have the big bucks when it comes to NIL. They are not playing on that same tier as the big boys. So we will see if that changes in the future. We will see how this class shakes out going down the line. We will be here to talk about it no matter what, John. As you and I blast on. So until next time, make sure that you are subscribed to BadgerBlitz.com for the best Wisconsin Badgers information and articles and the best message boards anywhere in the known universe. We'll be back again next week with more Badger Blitz TV. Until next time, he's John McNamara and I'm Matt Perkins, and we'll see you in the den.